Good evening to all of you. We are going to talk about medicine that was used by ancient peoples, primarily about the structure and functions of our digestive tract, as well as the ways we can improve it. We're also going to see the best medical treatments and foods used in ancient times for the function of human body. On this slide, we see the fundamental organs in our digestive system. From mouth to the rectum, we see all these organs displayed on this chart. Feeding and digestion starts even in our mouth, and then process spreads throughout the entire digestive tract. That complex nutritional substances that we consume here are taken apart into simple ones and then transported to all parts of our organism. The chewing process is being carried out in the mouth. It is necessary that we chew one bite at least 30 times so that saliva and digestive enzymes could perform their functions. Saliva has various functions. First, it transforms glucosans into glucose, it allows us to speak, and it has also antibacterial function. Due to those mechanisms, our food in the mouth may be chewed enough so that enzymes can then perform their duties. Our teeth are in charge of cutting and grinding food. When bite is moved through gullet or throttle, peristaltic movements push it to stomach. And you see how the bite successively moves to the belly. That process can be likened to our desire to move a solid object through a watering tube. By squeezing and relaxing, we perform movements of the object, and that is what peristaltic movements do in our gullet as well. The process of food traveling to the belly is the same as you can see on the slide right here. In that process, lubricating glands is esophagus, that is gullet, and it is very, very important. Now those glands are important because they lubricate each bite. You see them on this picture as well. They allow bite to get to stomach easily. It is important to note that each cell must use food and oxygen as well. Our food intake must be transported to each cell in order for cells to live. It is a machine in need for combustible. The most important fuel that our cells use is sugar, that is glucoses. When the bite goes through gullet and gets to the stomach, it arrives before a valve called cardia. Now, cardia's function is to prevent bite from returning to the gullet. Gullet would get hurt if the bite content was to return to it from the belly. Now, in stomach, the chloride hydrogenic acid is emitted. Its main function is to take apart nutritional elements that we eat through food. Now, stomach is 25 to 30 centimeters long, and its basic characteristics are as follows. It is 16 to 22 centimeters in range, wide 6 to 10 centimeters. The amount of content that can be found in stomach is 1,300 cubic centimeters. Stomach weighs 130 to 140 grams. Now inside stomachs there is a mucous membrane, and chloride hydrogenic and acid is emitted inside the stomach. But that acid is there to take food out the food content from the food. You see, it can take apart protein value of food we eat, but it can also take apart the very mucous membrane in the stomach. In order for that not to happen, the mucous membrane emits mucus that covers the membrane and prevents the membrane from being digested as well. Now, a meal remains in the stomach for 3 to 5 hours. Each 20 minutes there are peristaltic movements in the stomach. Those movements mix the food so that chloride, hydrogenic acid, and enzymes can perform their respective functions. At the end of the stomach there is another valve. It is called pylorus, which really means gatekeeper. The food from the thin gut must not return to stomach. So-called thin gut in our language, and yet digestive tract is very complex mechanism. Yet the digestion is helped always by both liver and pancreas. Liver emits choleric acids that first go to choleric bag. Choleric bag is about 8 centimeters long. Then those acids get emitted to duodenum, called also duodena. That intestine got its name due to its longevity. It is exactly 12 inches long or 27 centimeters. Choleric acid that get emitted to duodenum help take apart food intake, actually fats intake. On the other hand, pancreas emits pancreatic enzymes that are also emitted into duodenum. Now those enzymes speed up chemical reactions which allow stomach to take apart carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and other materials we take in. Chemistry is allowed in our stomach, and chemistry allows our food intake to be taken apart. Duodenum is built as seen on this photo. We see that it looks like a wrinkled linen. That enlarges the size of intestines, and here is where the most food absorption is taking place. In intestines we notice intestinal uvula or pumps. They absorb the nutritional content in intestines. Those uvulas have microvials or microuvulas. Now due to those uvulas, the size of intestines get enlarged. There is about 200 million of those microuvulas on 1 square millimeter. So in one spot. Now that is the reason why our intestines are enlarged 600 times more, because of microuvulas that absorb the content of our intestines. The size of our intestines is about 50 square meters. They are huge. The majority of digestion is carried out in intestines. Those uvulas have blood and lymph capillaries inside. Their function is to absorb nutritional materials and to transport them to all parts of our human organism. Due to microuvula, our intestines get 600 times larger with the purpose to maximally utilize food intake. That is the main goal of intestines. Through intestines, food is absorbed to uvulas, then through bloodstream it is transported to each cell, that is a like machine. Cells use as fuel what we eat each and every day. Now how are fats taken apart? Chloric bag emits chloric acids so that large fat particles are simplified, and those small particles of fat can be transported through blood and lymph. Now this process is like doing laundry. Detergent unbuilds big fat materials. That is what chloric acid, the acids do to big fat materials. Fat acids also serve as energy sources. When we analyze human organism, we see that it is a huge machine built from various elements in order for food to be maximally used. Liver has very significant role in digestion. It has the following functions: detoxification. It is reservoir of blood, vitamins and glucogens. It also produces chloric acids. And these are just several functions of our liver. On the lower side we see chyloride bag, actually colloid bag, and liver lobulus. They allow human body to function properly, for this is the largest gland that we have in our organism. Pancreas also helps digestion by its juices. its juices go to duodenum and allow for a complete digestive process, which is taking apart complex materials, digesting them and using them for nutrition. When the content comes to colon, we see slowed peristaltic process. Colon serves as a warehouse. It is dehydrated, which means that water is taken away from food. Food remains 12 to 14 hours in that organ. Due to slow motions in the colon, we can find there bacteria as well. Those bacteria are not always poisonous. In fact, in this case, these bacteria are symbiotic, which means they help digestive process and production of vitamin B12. In fact, our organism needs that vitamin in order to function properly. In case of ailments, bad nutrition, or various other disorders, a cancer can develop in colon. You see it on this slide. That cancer comes as the result of bad nutrition and other disorders. Here we see the best nutrition for our bodies: herbs, fruits, vegetables, and grain. What should man eat is the most important question today. It is mostly dealt by nutritionists who are taking care of those issues. Here we see these sympathetic carnivores. They have large jaws with fangs. We also see herbivores, animals with interesting molar teeth for grinding herbal food. We can clearly see the difference between carnivores and herbivores. They have different jaws as well as different teeth shape. Man has specific jaws and specific teeth, and so humans can thus use both kinds of foods. Digestive tract in carnivores has intestines that are much shorter compared to those in herbivores. This is so that toxins found in meat could faster be taken out of food. Herbivores, on the other hand, have very long digestive tracts. You see, herbs cause no harm whatsoever. So, complete food absorption can be performed in their tract. We see a clear distinction between digestive tracts of the two groups of animals. When compared with humans, we see that human intestines are very long. In fact, they're 9 meters long. Human intestines allow us to absorb foods. However, they also point out that human digestive tract was designed for herbal nutrition. Our hydrogenochloric acid is 10 times weaker compared to that in carnivores. That shows that we are much more prone to herbal foods. Here is a carnivore that does never get arteriosclerosis, the blood vessels ailment. That ailment is present only in those herbivores that consume meats. This carnivore cannot get ill from arteriosclerosis. Arteriosclerosis comes as the result of accumulation of plates in blood vessels when those plates prevent blood circulation. In certain cases, such individuals get angina pectoris, heart failure, and assortment of other disorders. Each second person on the earth dies from heart disorders, mostly due to blockage of blood vessels in either heart or brain. Carnivores, however, have no such problem because their organisms are adapted to meat intake. Humans that eat meats often get arteriosclerosis for the simple reason that our blood and digestive systems are adapted to herbal nutrition. You can see what happens when meats and fats are consumed. The results are various disorders in our bloodstream system. Our blood system is very unique. Here we see heart blood vessels. In case of plaque accumulation, bloodstream is obstructed, and the result is engine or heart failure, or those plaques break down causing a total bloodstream collapse, which in turn causes heart failure. Those heart problems usually cause a high death rate in our population. Human digestive tract is adapted to herbal nutrition. If man was to stick to herbal nutrition, he would have no heart problems. Due to our large intestines, we are able to absorb the entire herbal food intakes. One of our digestive tract disorders is obstipation. It results from bad nutrition, small amount of herbal fiber or celluloses in food intake, very little physical exercise and little amount of water in organism. Now those factors usually cause obstipation. What is recommendable in such situations? Foods, as you can see on the picture, that is fruits, vegetables and grains. We should particularly pay attention to bread we consume. We usually eat white bread. However, for the proper function of our intestines, it is most important that we eat wholemeal bread or brands from grain flour. Now you see what is our human paradox. That which is mostly valuable we waste and feed to cattle, while we use the white bread which has no nutritional value at all. Wholemeal bread helps better peristaltic movements in our intestines and it also prevents obstipation. Fruits have tremendous effect on our digestive tract as well. It is a must to drink at least 10 glasses of liquid per day so that our body can function properly. Dried plums are very favorable to digestive system as well. The next problem is diarrhea. It happens due to much liquid in feces, due to infections, polluted foods or other disorders. In that case, we shouldn't exclude all sorts of foods because it can cause collapse, dehydration and weakness. Drinking sodas is not recommendable because they can worsen the situation. What is recommended is the following: using many thick liquids from rice, wheat, corn or potatoes, then staples such as apples, carrots and rice, because it is very important to take in vitamin K. Kalium allows digestive tract to function well and it makes up for hypokalemia. Tomatoes and bananas have the largest amount of kalium. An exceptional fruit is the berry-like fruit blueberry. The next disorders are hemorrhoids or piles. They are actually a disorder which comes from enlarged rectum veins. They are usually caused by overweight, intestinal discharge problems, greater intake of milk products, proteins and glucosans, and because of poor blood circulation. It is not recommended that caffeine in any form is consumed, as you can see in the picture, because it only exacerbates the situation. Rectum, just as our digestive tract, works best when we eat herbal foods. Magnesium as a mineral is very much needed by our digestive tract. The largest amount of that mineral is found in sunflower seed, almonds, soya, walnuts and horsebean. We also need vitamin C, which is very useful to human body. It is mostly found in kiwi, peppers, cabbage, oranges and so on. It is important for us to conclude that the entire digestion process starts in mouth. One bite should be chewed 30 times in order to allow enzymes in the other part of digestive tract to perform their function. For proper body function, we should not consume light drugs, those that you see on the picture. We should not consume large amounts of foods. We should consume herbal foods because our digestive tract is adapted to that kind of nutrition. Plant fiber or celluloses is very important for the function of our digestive tract. The largest amount of cellulose, which makes possible the proper functions and many peristaltic movements, is found in vegetables such as cauliflower, tomato, celery, kale, spinach, onion, carrots and potato. In fruits, cellulose is mostly found in apples, pears, figs, berries, kiwis, peaches, etc. As we consider the uniqueness of our digestive tract and those 200 million uvulas on 1 square millimeter, the question is raised as to how did this digestive tract come about? Also, considering the stomach, we see that without the mucous membrane, the chloride and hydrogen acids would digest the stomach itself. Thus, we see a very complex mechanism in our organism. So the question is, how did those processes come about? If there was one substance missing, the mucous membrane would not be able to perform its function. Also consider the cells that produce that acid. All cells in our organism are twins, having the same genetic material. How is it possible that cells that emit that acid are exactly adaptable to that function in our stomach? Imagine for a moment if our eye cells would begin to emit chloride and hydrogenic acid. We would lose our eye. What is that genetic material that gets unlocked so that those cells would emit chloride and hydrogen acids? Simply put, these complex mechanisms in our digestive tract simply do not allow evolution theory to tell us that such complex systems had evolved gradually. They all had to come about in one moment. The principle here is all or nothing. Pancreatic enzymes are emitted in pancreas, but they get actively involved only when they get to duodenum. Imagine what would have happened if trypsin and other enzymes would start their activities within pancreas itself. In such case, the pancreas would get digested, which actually does happen in case of certain illnesses, such as pancreatitis. The entire pancreas gets digested and such patients usually die. Thankfully, however, there is an inhibitor to trypsin, so the pancreatic enzymes only get active in duodenum, where they absorb foods and take them apart. Imagine what would happen if proteins would start digesting process, since pancreas is made of proteins. So imagine what would have happened in case of self-digestion of our organs. So we see that there is a very complex system here. Therefore, we cannot speak about some kind of gradual evolution of those organs, for the lack of only one part would have caused death of our organism, because human organism cannot live without food and without digesting those important elements, carbohydrates, proteins and fats. We see that this digestive system on a chemical level cannot function, let it be completely tied up with each organ. Those enzymes would be very destructive to our bodies if they are not activated at the right time, in the right place. That indicates that there is an intelligent designer behind it. He created all of that in one moment. If, for example, trypsin would get formed prior to other structures, it would have digested our entire organism. Yet our systems are well designed and programmed to the slightest possible nuance. When speaking about proper organism functions, we are going to look back and see how some ancient peoples had very modern medicine. Most inventions today are for prevention medicine, meaning that the purpose to prevent disease is there, present in the West. In the West, they've calculated the cost of hospital treatments and concluded it is cheaper to invest in preventive medicine. Now we are going to see how ancient nations had preventive medicine all along. In order for human organism to function properly, immunity and factors related to it are very important. Our organism has its own defense. Once that defense is down, a man or a woman gets ill. We are surrounded by microorganisms everywhere around us. Here we see the top of a pin viewed through microscope. You can see now the microorganisms of bacteria. Our organism also has pores that emit sweat. That is how the temperature of our organism is lowered so that it can function properly. Here at the exit of sweat pores, we see little things which are bacteria. You see bacteria right there in our body. We brush our teeth and go to sleep peacefully. But now see this multitude of microorganisms on a brushed tooth. They threaten to cause a disorder. We breathe air every day, yet we never consider that on our respiratory system there are millions upon millions of microorganisms. They're found on the mucous membrane of our respiratory system. So the question is, how do we survive in good health in the midst of so many attackers, microorganisms? On this slide you see amoeba found in the digestive tract. It can cause bleeding. Each day we are exposed to all kinds of infective microorganisms. We also wonder how ancient nations that did not know anything about modern medicine and microbiology were able to maintain good health. Robert Koch and Louis Pasteur were the first individuals to start the development of modern medicine. Only in 1836 it was discovered that microorganisms can cause diseases. Koch and Pasteur were researching. Koch mostly researched bacteria, while Pasteur found causes for a couple of diseases. Now, what happened prior to 800s? Prior to establishing that microorganisms cause illnesses, from our perspective, those nations stood no chances of survival. In their medicine records, we find what kind of medicine they practiced. For example, let us see what mere medicine regulations were there 3,500 years ago. Here is a quote. Open wood should be treated with reptile blood mixed with donkey excrement. To strengthen the root of hair, treat the hair with ground donkey teeth mixed with honey. Now that was the pinnacle of modern medicine at that time. That is because they did not know how any disease came about. These are quotes from the Egyptian medicine. At the same time, however, there lived a nation with a very contemporary medicine. We are going to compare that medicine with our contemporary one. Only 200 years ago, cholera and plague outbreaks claimed millions of human lives simply because the cause of those illnesses was not known. Also, it was not known that diseased individuals should be isolated due to the infective nature of those diseases. That is why outbreaks occurred 150 years ago and even later. However, there is a nation, a Jewish nation, of which we read in Moses' books. They lived 3,500 years ago. Consider this. 200 years ago, there was no knowledge about microorganisms and infections. That nation lived 3,500 years ago in a desert. Their living conditions were very non-hygienic. But let us see what measures they had taken to prevent infections. The record of Jewish nation says this. When one is ill, he is unclean and should live by himself, outside of his dwelling. So, 3,500 years ago, quarantine was known. Those who were infected were to be put aside in order not to affect others. Yet the modern medicine did not know anything about that 200 years ago. Also, 150 years ago, medicine staff would go to maternity hospitals straight from mortuaries with unwashed hands. They then performed births, and each second a woman would die after giving birth because of various diseases, sepsis, etc. Even some doctors who suggested that hands should be washed, such as Dr. Semmelweis in Wien, Austria, were mocked and expelled from hospitals. What use was there if the hands were washed? You see, they did not know what was going on molecular level. And they also did not know how diseases spread. And we're talking about modern Europe, and yet 3,500 years ago that ancient nation had a record which says that in the evening a person should bathe in water and then enter the camp after sunset if he touched a dead person. Now we are drawing a parallel. Where did this nation get the idea about disinfection of hands and quarantine when contemporary modern people had no clue about those practices? Furthermore, here is a record dating back to 3,500 years ago regarding sterilization. It says that whatever can sustain fire should be cleansed through fire, and other materials should be cleansed through water. Today, every microbiology lab practices sterilization through fire or some other methods. But we are talking about modern medicine practice. Yet, how did those people 3,500 years ago know about sterilization? They were a primitive nation living in non-hygienic conditions. Our modern medicine today knows what is the healthiest food for human consumption. And here is what was known among the people who lived 3,500 years ago. It says that it is an eternal law for them in all their generations never to eat fat or blood. We already said that fat nutrition causes atherosclerosis due to fat plaques that get formed on blood vessels. In fact, the scientists have found on Egyptian mummies those fat accumulations that formed due to fat nutrition. Well, the same is going on today, but this nation had a commandment not to consume fat nor blood. Blood is very infectious. In fact, there is microbiological study done with blood. Blood is used to research microorganisms and their colonies that spawn in blood. Yet, this account written 3,500 years ago says that blood should not be eaten. There is another account saying that people who are related should not get married. That account written 3,500 years ago was to prevent incest. Yet you surely know what medieval kings did in Europe. They married among relatives in order to preserve their wealth, get related to other crowns, and retain their positions in Europe. As a result, there were many genetic diseases extant in royal families. In fact, genetic diseases can be easily inherited in incestuous relations. Royal families did not accept that. Yet, 3,500 years ago, it was clearly said that relatives should not be getting married. Where did Jewish people get that information from? Circumcision is another interesting phenomenon in Jewish nation. It is a phenomena. You see, they lived in non-hygienic conditions, so they needed circumcision. Today it is not applicable in practice, but there was a research as to why did Jews do that. Is there any medical justification for that practice? For the record says that each male child when it is 8 days old should be circumcised. Why is that? What does that mean? Is that a right, fanaticism, or whatever? Modern medicine has given an answer to that since it has established the following. Jewish women whose husbands are circumcised do not get cervix cancer. It is considered that cervix cancer is much more frequent in cases of uncircumcised males. Thus, we have a medicinal justification for that rule. Yet, why on the 8th day? Well, when medicine vents out into researching it always gets the right answer. And the answer is this. Several days following the birth, there is vitamin K deficit in baby's organism. That vitamin is vital for blood coagulation, since circumcision causes bleeding, of course. Anyhow, vitamin K is lacking because liver in babies is not sufficiently developed, and there is lack of intestinal activities, and vitamin K obtained from mother is increasingly used in the first several postnatal days. Thus, it would be dangerous to circumcise child in those days. Yet we see that on the 8th day there is the highest level of immunoglobulin in child's bloodstream. So we do have certain justification for some of those regulations that were applied 3,500 years ago. Here is what Dr. Macmillan said. The perfect day to carry out a circumcision is the 8th day. How could Jews know that 3,500 years ago when they were not able to establish the content of their blood through laboratory research? They also could not see when wounds heal better. Regarding the pyramid of healthy nutrition, contemporary medicine knows that it implies intake of large quantities of fruits, grains, and vegetables. We have already seen that such foods help the entire body. The account of Jewish nation also says that it was given all the herbs and fruits of the trees for food. So here we see a rule of preventive medicine on what is to be consumed, so that humans can live longer and happier and healthier lives. Now that was going on 3,500 years ago, at the same time when Egyptians who ate fats and got heart diseases were living along that nation. So in this record, we see that pinnacle of preventive medicine 3,500 years ago. That is what contemporary science has confirmed today. We often hear about diseases that come from lower immune system. On this chart, we see organs in charge of our immunity. When immune system goes down, we can contract disease easily. But let us see what was going on in America 200 years ago. There is a record in Medicine magazine on George Washington, former United States President. It says, on December 12, 1799, it was a rainy, windy day and it was snowing in Mount Vernon. Regardless of the weather conditions, the general, who seemed to be perfectly healthy, did not miss his habitual writing about his farm from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. The next morning, he complained about sore throat. Then he got out to mark the tree to be cut. At 3 a.m. next morning, Washington called out his wife and told her he had just had a fever attack. A farm attendant who was experienced in letting the blood was called upon. Half liter of blood was let out at once. At 11 a.m. Dr. James Craig arrived to Mount Vernon. Due to alarming conditions, 2 more doctors were sent for. The blood was let out from 2 locations, but seemingly without any outcome. When another doctor arrived, letting 1 liter of blood was attempted at once. One present person noted that blood was streaming out in slow, thick gush. Today, those doctors would have been accused of murder. Yet that was a contemporary medicinal practice 200 years ago in America. They were not aware of any better medical treatments. Now, parallelly with that, we can follow the medicine of Jewish people 3,500 years ago. And such was the end of George Washington. Yet those who have read accounts of Moses have come to the conclusion that Washington did not have to die, for it is written that life of every living being is in his blood. Now that is clear, since blood contains 25 billion red blood cells that transport oxygen and perform other important functions. We also have accounts about spiritual conditions. One of the wisest men in human history, Solomon, wrote the following: "A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." And that is true in figurative and literal sense. Immune system goes drastically down in those who are depressed. Dr. David Felton experimented on various groups of experimental animals. He experimented on mice and others. He wanted to see whether there is a connection between immune and nervous systems, that is, a brain system. He wanted to see if the immune system can learn things. In that experiment, he separated nervous endings from immune organs from thymus. And what happened? Such mice were much more susceptible to illnesses compared to those whose nervous and immune systems were connected. So, our immune system is capable of learning and resisting various infections. Depressions today are not rarity. The main characteristic of that condition is the feeling of helplessness. Some experiments were done, and here is one of them. 100 patients with bone marrow transplantations. Of those, 13 were depressed and 87 were normal patients. 12 of those depressed ones died in 1 year. From those others, 34 lived normally even after 2 years. Now that tells us that depression has influence on death results. Experiments were also done with 2,832 heart patients, of whom 3% were depressed. Death rate in those depressed was 4 times greater, so we see that depression can cause death. Depression is a death risk factor for heart patients. It has the same effect as infarct, left ventricular dysfunction, and heart attack. So depression is extremely dangerous, yet who hasn't fallen into depression occasionally? We have all been there. And here is what contemporary medicine suggests as depression therapy. First, electric stimulation. Now that is not popular at all, because by getting electric shocks, brain supposedly change the course of depressing thoughts. Then, cognitive change, which suggests that a course of thinking should be changed from heavy stuff to something positive. Then physical exercise, which certainly improves depressing conditions. So we should set out to do some house chores, gardening, or go out. And then warm baths and showers. They help in removing depression. Helping others. When we go to hospitals and sanatoriums and see handicapped people or those without legs or arms or with various degenerations, we only then realize that what advantage we have over them and that we should help them. Yet many of those people are happier than us. You have seen people without legs or arms that are happier than us, and that is because our thoughts absorb us so much that we think we have the worst in the world. So helping others, our neighbors, friends, children without parents, those things help us prevent depression. Finally, communication. It is important to communicate with people. We should not close ourselves to one space. It is also important to communicate with one who has created all these perfect systems. You see, if that creator wanted to show a nation what should be preventive medicine, and if he wanted to show that to mankind throughout history, he also wants to help us today. It is also important that we get in touch with him. Research on 122 men who suffered heart attacks showed that in 8 years period, 21 out of 25 most pessimistic ones dies, while 6 out of 21 most optimistic ones died. That is a drastic difference. Those who have bright outlooks survive much better. We are all aware of that. But how can we change the course of our thinking? So therefore, it is better that we face these facts. That mental condition is better indicator of survival than degree of heart damage, blockage of arteries, cholesterol level, which can lead to coagulation in blood vessels, and even the high blood pressure. What is our outlook on life? Mental condition is better indicator than these heavy diseases. And so, when we think about that, we surely conclude that a cheerful heart is like a medicine, while broken or crushed spirit dries up bones. That is the fact. Well-known fact indeed. And now think about our digestive system, our perfect spotless digestive system, which switches on right on time. We have enzymes that work on their time, chloride and hydrogen acids that are active, while mucus prevents it from digesting our entire body. We see that such a process cannot happen by a chance or step by step. Evolution theory has no explanation for that, for a gradual development of those organs would lead to death. If all elements are not connected, there are no functions. If only one little part is malfunctioning, it can cause enormous diseases. It is perfectly clear that such systems could have only been created by a creator. When considering nations that respected Mosaic principles given by the Creator 3,500 years ago, we see that they clearly were different from other nations. 200 years ago, contemporary medicine had no clue about prevention, quarantine, proper nutrition, or basic characteristics of life. You see, they were letting blood out, and that was their best form of treatment. Yet, 3,500 years ago, nations did have knowledge about preventive medicine. Where did they get that knowledge from? They got it from the written word in which the Creator informed them on how to conduct their lives. He is now informing the entire humankind, but humankind does not want to accept that information. Why? Well, because moral standards in that word are high. By intuition, man knows that those principles are hard to keep, so he rejects the truth. Ivan Karamazov said, "If there is no creator, nothing is forbidden." Every human knows that. If anything is allowed, we have absolute freedom to do whatever we conceive in our minds. However, we do have absolute proofs that perfect mechanisms that work in us could not happen by a chance. We also have absolute proofs that those generations from the past who wanted to hear what the Creator had to say lived much happier, more satisfied and better lives. In fact, they survived in spite of all infective diseases, plague, cholera, etc. Simply put, we have two models. One is the creation concept, the other evolutionist. Evolution concept says that we are but a spark on the earth. The other concept says that we were perfectly created and that by our own volition we had separated from the source of energy. John Chrysostom said that when we receive money, we always count it. Yet when we receive important information that have eternal values, we accept the opinions of others without analyzing them. And that is the greatest problem today. The greatest problem of today is the lack of interest for the truth. There is indifference toward the truth. Nobody is any longer interested to know it. Money, pleasure and survival are important today. Modern lifestyle is hedonistic. Eat, drink and have pleasure. While the other group of people is barely surviving. Well, that is another balance that exists on the earth. But back to the point. We have an absolute indicator and absolute indicators that perfect systems in us could not have happened by a chance. We can be deceived. Deception is an intellectual need for individual that wants to be destructive. So we find justifications, just as racists find justification for striving against blacks, even though there is no real reason other than those people being black. Those racists can come up with all kinds of irrational ideas, such as they have come from hell, that is why they're black, or they are a lower race on the level of monkeys, so we should eliminate them. Those are all irrational reasons. There are no real reasons. However, man always finds reasons for destructive behavior. There are absolute facts before us, facts that we can analyze. As much as we research, as many information we will get. As for tonight, thank you for your attention. Good night.